There are moments in football when reality simply stops making sense. A 17-year-old walks onto the pitch at the biggest tournament in the world. Around him are players worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Champions League winners. International stars. Veterans with more experience than he has years of life. And yet, somehow, he looks like the calmest player on the field. Not because he runs faster. Not because he dribbles better. But because he seems to know exactly what will happen before everyone else does. This is the story of a teenager who became the second youngest player in history to start a World Cup knockout match. A player who has already caught the attention of Zlatan Ibrahimovic. A player being monitored by Real Madrid, Barcelona, and Manchester City. A player who might be the answer to a question Mexico has been asking for decades. His name is Gilberto Mora. And the frightening part is, he may only be getting started. Mexico has produced legendary footballers before. They have produced stars, icons, champions. But for years, there has always been one question hanging over Mexican football. Where is the player capable of controlling the biggest games in the world? Not just scoring spectacular goals. Not just creating highlights. But controlling football itself. A player capable of slowing the game down when everyone else panics. A player capable of finding space before anyone else can see it. A player capable of making impossible decisions look completely normal. For a long time, that player never arrived. Then came Gilberto Mora. At just 17 years old, Mora is already doing things that should not be possible. While most footballers his age are still trying to earn minutes at senior level, Mora is already becoming the center of Mexico's most important attacks. And this is not simply because he is talented. Football history is full of talented teenagers. What makes Gilberto Mora different is something much rarer. He thinks differently. Watch him carefully for just a few minutes and you'll notice something strange. Before receiving the ball, he scans. Once. Twice. 3 times. His head never stops moving. His eyes are constantly collecting information. While defenders are reacting to the game, Mora is predicting it. And that tiny advantage changes everything. Because by the time the ball reaches his feet, the decision has already been made. To most fans, it looks effortless. To defenders, it becomes a nightmare. And nowhere has that become more obvious than during this World Cup. Because what Gilberto Mora is doing right now is no longer just exciting Mexico. He is forcing the entire football world to pay attention. There is a reason why scouts become obsessed with certain players long before the rest of the world notices them. It isn't because of goals. It isn't because of highlights. And it certainly isn't because of social media clips. It is because, every once in a while, they see a player making decisions that simply do not match his age. That is exactly what happened with Gilberto Mora. By the time most football fans were hearing his name for the first time, many of Europe's biggest clubs were already watching closely. Because what they were seeing wasn't normal. At 17 years and 259 days old, Gilberto Mora became the second youngest player in history to start a World Cup knockout match. Only one player had ever done it at a younger age. Pelé. Just hearing those two names in the same sentence sounds absurd. And to be clear, nobody is saying Gilberto Mora is the next Pelé. But when a teenager begins appearing in records that have survived for decades, people pay attention. Very quickly. And the most frightening part? He didn't look overwhelmed. He looked comfortable. Actually, comfortable might not even be the right word. He looked like he belonged. That feeling first became impossible to ignore during Mexico's opening World Cup matches. The pressure was enormous. The expectations were growing. Millions of people were watching. Yet Gilberto Mora continued doing exactly what he always does. He kept asking for the ball. Again. And again. Because while most young players try to survive on the biggest stage, Mora was trying to control it. Against South Africa, there was one moment that perfectly explained why football experts had become so fascinated by him. The ball broke loose in midfield. Most players would have taken the safe option. Instead, Mora did something different. With one touch, he stole possession. With the next, he played a perfectly weighted back heel that instantly turned defense into attack. The move lasted less than 2 seconds. But inside those 2 seconds were timing, awareness, confidence, and courage. It wasn't just skill. It was intelligence. And that distinction matters. Because football intelligence is the one talent that almost cannot be taught. You either see the game differently, or you don't. And Gilberto Mora clearly does. Then came another performance. And another. And another. Suddenly, people stopped asking whether he was simply having a good tournament. They started asking a much bigger question. How good is this kid actually? Because every match seemed to reveal another layer of his game. His passing. His movement. His positioning. His composure. Nothing looked rushed. Nothing looked accidental. And eventually, some of football's biggest names began noticing too. Even Zlatan Ibrahimovic couldn't hide his admiration. He saw something he recognized immediately. Personality. Confidence. The willingness to play football without fear. Then came Thierry Henry. And Henry didn't focus on goals. He didn't focus on highlights. He focused on something much more important. Control. Because while millions of fans were watching the action, Henry noticed the teenager in midfield dictating the rhythm of the game. Knowing exactly when to attack. Knowing exactly when to slow things down. Knowing exactly when to wait. That is not normal. Not at 17. Not at a World Cup. And certainly not against some of the best players on the planet. Which explains why some of Europe's biggest clubs have started watching every minute of his development. Real Madrid, Barcelona, Manchester City, Chelsea. They are all asking the same question. Not whether Gilberto Mora has talent. That question has already been answered. What they want to know is far more frightening. If he is already this good at 17, what happens when he becomes 22? Every generation produces talented footballers. Some are faster. Some are stronger. Some possess technical abilities that leave defenders embarrassed. But every once in a while, a player appears with something far more dangerous. The ability to see football differently. That is the quality separating Gilberto Mora from almost every player his age. Because when scouts watch Mora, they aren't just watching what he does with the ball. They are watching everything he does before he receives it. And that is where things become truly fascinating. Watch Gilberto Mora carefully during any match. Not when he has possession. Before he has possession. His head never stops moving. Left. Right. Over the shoulder. Again. And again. And again. To most fans, it looks insignificant. To elite coaches, it reveals everything. Every scan creates information. Every glance builds a mental map. Every movement helps him understand where the pressure is coming from, where the space will appear, and what decision he will make before the ball even reaches him. That is why Mora rarely looks rushed. Because by the time everyone else begins thinking, he has already decided. And if that sounds familiar, there is a reason. One of the most famous examples of this ability came during the World Cup final when Lionel Messi scanned his surroundings multiple times before scoring one of the most important goals of his career. Those scans weren't accidental. They were preparation. The world's greatest players don't react faster because they run faster. They react faster because they think earlier. Gilberto Mora is already showing the same habit. And nowhere was that more obvious than during Mexico's performance against Ecuador. This was supposed to be the moment when reality finally caught up with him. The opponent was stronger. The pressure was greater. The stakes were enormous. But something unexpected happened. Gilberto Mora didn't just survive. He controlled the game. From the opening minutes, Ecuador struggled to understand where he was going to appear next. Sometimes he dropped deep alongside the midfielders. Sometimes he drifted into the half spaces. Sometimes he positioned himself between the defensive lines where nobody wanted to follow him. And every movement created another problem. Because Mora doesn't move randomly. Every step has a purpose. One sequence perfectly captured why he is becoming such a special player. Jorge Sanchez began an overlapping run down the right side. Most young players would have played the obvious pass immediately. Mora didn't. Instead, he carried the ball forward. He waited. He attracted defenders. He forced Ecuador's defensive line to collapse toward him. And only then did he release the attack. It lasted a few seconds. But those few seconds created chaos. That is what elite playmakers do. They don't simply find space. They create it. Again and again throughout the match, Ecuador faced the same problem. If they pressed him aggressively, he escaped. If they gave him space, he punished them. If they tried to predict his next move, he changed the angle entirely. And perhaps the most frightening part was how calm he remained throughout all of it. No panic. No hesitation. No fear. Just decision after decision. Correct decision after correct decision. At one point, Mora received the ball with his back to goal under intense pressure. For many young players, that situation is a nightmare. For Mora, it became an opportunity. One touch to protect the ball. One turn to escape pressure. One pass to break the defensive structure. 3 actions. 3 perfect decisions. And suddenly Mexico were attacking again. That sequence may never appear in a highlight compilation. But coaches notice those moments immediately. Because football matches are rarely won by spectacular actions alone. They are won by players capable of making the right decision over and over again. That is why defenders hate playing against footballers like Gilberto Mora. Not because they know what he will do, but because they don't. And perhaps the most terrifying part of all this is that his football intelligence still appears unfinished. Every tournament reveals another layer. Every difficult opponent teaches him something new. Every performance raises another question. If Gilberto Mora already understands football at this level, what happens when experience finally catches up with his talent? Talent can attract attention. But talent alone does not convince Real Madrid. It does not convince Barcelona. And it certainly does not convince Manchester City. The world's biggest clubs do not spend millions chasing highlights. They spend millions chasing certainty. They search for players who can survive pressure. Players who can adapt. Players who can continue making intelligent decisions when everything around them becomes chaotic. And that is exactly why Gilberto Mora has become one of the most fascinating young footballers on the planet. Because every time the pressure increases, he somehow appears to become calmer. Long before the World Cup placed him under the global spotlight, Mora had already begun proving that big occasions did not intimidate him. The evidence was there during the Gold Cup. In the semifinal, with an entire nation watching, Mora produced a moment that perfectly captured what makes him special. The defenders expected him to rush. He didn't. They expected him to force the pass. He didn't. Instead, he waited. 1 second. Then another. And at precisely the right moment, he delivered a pass so perfectly weighted that it transformed a difficult attack into a goal. The assist itself was beautiful. The decision behind it was extraordinary. Because elite playmakers do not simply see opportunities. They understand exactly when those opportunities will appear. That ability cannot be taught easily. It is instinct. And Gilberto Mora already possesses it. Then came the final. The stage became bigger. The pressure became heavier. The expectations became impossible. And once again, Mora looked completely unaffected. Against the United States, he played with a confidence that felt almost unnatural for a 17-year-old. He demanded possession. He attacked space. He escaped pressure. And perhaps most importantly, he never hid. That matters more than statistics. Because football history is filled with talented players who disappeared the moment pressure arrived. The greatest players respond differently. They ask for the ball. Again. And again. And again. Gilberto Mora belongs much closer to that category. But there is another reason coaches trust him so quickly. Watch what happens when Mexico lose possession. Many attacking players switch off. They stop moving. They wait for someone else to recover the ball. Mora does the opposite. The moment possession changes, his thinking changes. He immediately begins scanning. Where is the danger? Where is the passing lane? Where should pressure be applied? His first movement is rarely emotional. It is intelligent. Sometimes he wins the ball himself. Other times, he forces the opponent into making the mistake. Either way, he influences the outcome. Those moments almost never appear on social media. Coaches notice them immediately. Because modern football is no longer about attacking and defending separately. The world's best players understand every phase of the game. And Gilberto Mora already plays with that understanding. Perhaps that is why his teammates trust him so naturally. Watch Mexico carefully whenever they build an attack. Players move around Mora differently. Fullbacks push forward because they trust he will find them. Forwards time their runs because they believe the pass will arrive. Midfielders remain calm because they know someone is controlling the rhythm. That influence cannot be measured by goals or assists alone. It changes the behavior of an entire team. And when a 17-year-old begins changing the behavior of experienced professionals, people notice. Scouts notice. Managers notice. Sporting directors notice. Which explains why some of the biggest clubs in Europe are already watching every step of his development. Barcelona have followed his progress closely. Manchester City continue monitoring his evolution. Real Madrid understand exactly how valuable elite football intelligence can become. And honestly, their interest makes perfect sense. Because what they are seeing is not simply another talented teenager. They are seeing a player whose greatest quality is the one thing football cannot easily teach. Decision-making. That is why comparisons continue growing. That is why expectations continue rising. And that is why one question now follows Gilberto Mora everywhere he goes. Not whether he can become a great player, but just how great he can become. Because if football has taught us anything, it is this. Players with extraordinary intelligence often reach places that nobody expected. And Gilberto Mora's journey may still be only beginning. The greatest challenge in football is not reaching the top. It is staying there. That is the question every scout, every coach, every sporting director, and every football fan is quietly asking when they watch Gilberto Mora. Not whether he has talent. That question has already been answered. The real question is far more difficult. How much better can he become? Because football history is filled with extraordinary young players. Teenagers who looked unstoppable. Wonder kids who seemed destined to dominate the sport for the next decade. Some became legends. Many disappeared. The reasons were always different. For some, injuries changed everything. For others, confidence slowly vanished. Sometimes it was the wrong transfer. Sometimes it was the wrong manager. Sometimes the pressure simply became too much. Because football does not care how talented you are. It only cares whether you can continue proving it. Again. And again. And again. That is why every great career is built on something deeper than talent. It is built on mentality. And so far, Gilberto Mora has shown signs of possessing exactly that. Watch how he reacts after making a mistake. He doesn't hide. He doesn't stop asking for the ball. He doesn't allow one bad decision to influence the next one. Instead, he continues playing with the same confidence, the same courage, the same belief. That is not arrogance. It is composure. And there is a very important difference. Arrogant players believe they cannot fail. Composed players understand that failure is inevitable, but refuse to let it define them. Gilberto Mora appears much closer to the second category. That mentality may ultimately become his greatest strength. Because football intelligence alone does not create superstars. Mental strength does. The willingness to improve does. The ability to survive pressure does. And perhaps that is why so many people inside football have become genuinely excited about his future. Not because he has already achieved everything, but because he still feels unfinished. Every tournament reveals another layer. Every difficult opponent teaches him something new. Every performance suggests there is still far more to discover. Imagine Gilberto Mora 5 years from now. Imagine him competing every week against the best players in Europe. Imagine him learning from world-class coaches. Imagine him playing in matches where every decision must be made 1 second faster. If his greatest strength is already his understanding of football, what happens when every other part of his game catches up? That possibility is what makes him so fascinating. And perhaps that is why Mexico has become so hopeful. For decades, Mexican football has searched for a player capable of controlling the biggest moments. Not simply a star, Not simply a goal scorer, but a footballer capable of changing the way the game is played around him. A player whose intelligence becomes contagious. A player teammates trust. A player opponents fear. A player coaches build around. Gilberto Mora may become that player. Or perhaps football will take his story somewhere nobody expects. Because football has never promised greatness to anyone. The future remains unwritten. But one thing already feels impossible to ignore. Gilberto Mora is no longer simply a promising young talent. He is becoming a player that opponents must prepare for. A player teammates believe in. A player the football world can no longer afford to ignore. Years from now, people may remember the goals, the assists, the trophies, the transfer headlines. Those moments will matter. But they may not tell the entire story. Because the real beginning of Gilberto Mora's journey is happening right now. In the movements nobody notices. In the decisions statistics cannot measure. In the moments before the ball even reaches his feet. That is where extraordinary careers often begin. Every generation produces footballers who change the way we see the game. It is far too early to know whether Gilberto Mora will reach that level. But if his journey continues with the same intelligence, courage, humility, and composure that have defined these early years, then today's performances may one day be remembered as the first chapters of something truly special. And perhaps, years from now, when the biggest stadiums in the world rise to applaud his performances, people will look back on this moment and realize something extraordinary. The signs were always there. The vision, the composure, the courage, the intelligence. The football world simply needed time to recognize them. Because some careers begin with noise. Others begin with quiet excellence. And Gilberto Mora's story feels like the kind that is only just beginning.